You ever seen anything like this before?
No. And it's still changing. It's figuring us out faster than we're figuring it out.
It doesn't have anything else to do. So we have a novel virus with a mortality rate in the low 20s, no treatment protocol, and no vaccine at this time.
That is correct.
From here on out, I want no one working on this except the PSL-4. The last thing we need is for this thing to walk out of the lab on the bottom of someone's ship.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Psych podcast, the podcast where film meets psychology. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today's episode is gonna hit pretty close to home. The little bumper I had at the beginning, I had no input. I just wanted to play a nice little scene from the film that we are discussing today. And that film, very timely, Contagion. This film came out in 2011 and a huge number of stars. Steven Soderbergh directed, huge number of stars. Lawrence Fishburne, whose voice you'll hear quite a few times in this episode because of the clips that I got. Kate Winslet, Marianne Cotillard. Gwyneth Paltrow has an untimely death, probably from all the Goop products that she unsuccessfully used to save her from the virus. Matt Damon's in it. Jude Law. Dr. Sanjay Gupta plays himself, which is great because he's currently interviewing people about coronavirus, COVID-19 right now. So, almost 10 years later, life is imitating art. Luckily, it isn't as crazy as the film right now, but fingers crossed. I'm going to knock on some wood here that it doesn't get as crazy. But there are a lot of parallels in the film that we do want to talk about. And so we'll get to that in a little bit when I introduce our guest host for today. Before we jump into that, I did want to just give a shout out to all of the listeners and the sharers and the likers and all of the people who are supporting this podcast in the way that they have been doing. We just recently surpassed 1,000 downloads, and that's through, from what I understand, through all of the ways that you can get it. All of the aggregation goes to the media source, so where we have it hosted at Podbean. Shout out to Podbean there. And so we just surpassed 1,000 downloads, and I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for listening and chatting and sharing and all of that stuff, and being on the show. To some of you who are regular listeners who have been on the show, it's pretty amazing. I know 1,000 downloads, it doesn't sound like much, but we're still on the upward trajectory, and that's where I want to keep going, and 1,000 is a kind of interesting milestone. So I just wanted to bring that up before we jumped straight into this episode. My guest host today is Dr. Anthony Zoccolillo. Anthony is a native East Coaster and cinephile, but is coming to us today from South Texas, where he is a professional associate professor at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi. He teaches a wide variety of courses in which he has found new and interesting ways to incorporate film, into his teaching. Very good. I like that. Most notably and fun, he regularly teaches several classes on psychology and film, or psychology and popular culture. I would love to take both of those classes, honestly. Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'm happy to have you on. So we're going to jump straight into discussing this very important film. But just very quickly, because I have to, with all of my guests, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on film in general and why you use film in your teaching.
Well, I've been using film in my teaching for quite a long time. Long ago, it started as a way of incorporating into my general psych and abnormal psych to explore some of the portrayals of mental illness and how noticeably it feeds into some of the myths and misconceptions.
Yes, definitely.
That evolved because it was so interesting and got the students talking. It evolved into using it with other general psych topics. And that grew into its own standalone courses where I try to explore the links between psychology and film, television, music, really all elements of popular culture.
Right.
So, for instance, this summer, I'm scheduled to teach a psych and film course, and we're going to look at and do an extended take on the movies and mental illness connection.
Right.
I usually do something with superheroes and also looking at the dysfunctional family. And I'm actually preparing to possibly have to teach this class on online. So that's
just as we were
challenge.
discussing right before we started recording that this whole COVID situation, you're gonna likely have to do it online, which isn't the end of the world, I imagine.
No, not at all. It's interesting, it's challenging, but it's forcing me to reconsider what I'm doing. So that's fine.
Yeah. Luckily, doing an online film course, I mean, I'm just talking about film in general, doing an online film course, there are at least a number of different ways that students can then, consume the media, whether it's through, like you were saying, Canopy, which is a great service for education, through the library, through local library, if the films are available on Netflix or Hulu or anything like that. So, I mean, at least it's something that you could do over the break or over the summer.
Yeah, I may just have to switch up some films depending on their availability. But other than that, if they could stream it, then we could probably use WebEx or Zoom to have synchronous discussions and then take some of it in asynchronous and have them discuss it amongst themselves. Like I said, I haven't really spent a lot of time yet developing this.
Yeah, I mean, more pressing matters is this semester online, right?
just surviving this semester is really the goal right now.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've referenced it quite a bit. I started the show by talking about the background of the film Contagion. All right, Anthony, what was your reasoning behind this choice? I mean,
yeah, it seemed kind of a little obvious, but the tie-in to the current events was just an opportunity way too rich to pass up.
I agree.
When I originally suggested it, I hadn't seen it in a while, but I could remember the movie or remember key parts of it. I knew there was a lot of rich psychological content to mine.
Right.
But I also, at the same time, was seeing all of these internet stories about how, this was becoming, a highly searched topic and streamed at a high rate. And so that kind of got me thinking. And at the same time was seeing lots of different stories about how people deal with uncertainty and pandemic psychology. So it was all kind of coming together when we were starting to think about how we were going to plan this episode. And and I was getting a lot of questions from students, the most often being, well, why are people hoarding toilet paper? And I couldn't answer them. So it's been interesting. And then once I rewatched the film, I was like, oh yeah, we want to do this.
Yes, right. And I went back through, and I didn't actually rewatch it, but I went back through a number of clips and reread the synopsis because I was pretty sure I remembered the film. And I also watched a deep dive take on it of all of what they got right, what they got wrong. So, and I had just watched that recently because the YouTube channel that I watched it on took advantage of the moment as well. And I feel like that's what we're doing. We're taking advantage of the moment. But the good news about this one is us taking advantage of the moment is that we're not going to try to create some sort of hysteria or pandemonium. I think what we can offer is a level-headed analysis of the genre of movie that does sometimes, and we could put in zombie films in this, depending on how the zombies are created. On this kind of genre of film.
Yeah.
And I think of the genre of film, Contagion
Outbreak.
gets this
Yeah, that was Outbreak.
mostly correct of all the ones that I've seen.
Outbreak.
So
Yeah,
zombie
that was
films
terrible.
notwithstanding. But what was the one with Dustin Hoffman that came out about almost 20 years ago? Pandemic or something like that? Or Outbreak. Yeah, you're right. I was just in my head. Oh, what was the Evolution? The quirky one with the alien species. I know it's not necessarily an infection kind of movie, but I feel like it warrants a mention. The science that is represented in Contagion is pretty good. Pretty good. There's some liberties that Scott Burns, the writer, and Steven Soderbergh take to create a drama around a deadly disease. I believe the mortality rate for the virus in Contagion is about 20%, which is
2025.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. That is like population wiping,
right?
Right.
And
if you compare that to
get a chance to rewatch it, one of the things I really liked about the movie was they use these timestamps. How many days from day one?
Yes.
And when you start to look at those, especially since the majority of the film takes place between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so a period of about 4 weeks, we're talking about numbers in the millions, according to the film, at that point. So yeah, when you talk about 20 to 25%, that is kind of scary.
Yeah, and if you compare that to our current coronavirus, COVID-19 mortality rate, which is depending on age group and underlying factors, somewhere I think the figure is somewhere between 2 and 3%.
Right.
Is that a figure that you've been hearing?
Yeah, 2% is the one that I've hear the most.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly good average, with the rates being higher for older age groups and the rates being lower for younger age groups. But yeah, so the virus in Contagion is like 10 times more deadly than COVID-19.
Right. Well, one of the things that I found really fascinating, and he's been in the news, and I unfortunately don't have his name, but the epidemiologist who was the consultant on the film.
Oh, let me see. I have IMDb open. Let me see if I can find that. But go ahead.
Yeah, he actually was recently diagnosed or tested positive for COVID-19.
Oh, no.
But one of his quotes, and kind of goes to what you were saying, was his attempt or his job, I guess, was to accurately represent science that would entertain as well as educate.
Yes, I love that because I feel like that's what like Dr. Keltner and Paul Ekman did for Inside Out.
Yep. So the consultant for the film was Dr. Mark Smolinski.
Mark Smolinski. Okay, very cool. Yeah, and so he recently said that that was his role on the film, and that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah, the idea of entertaining while educating.
Excellent. And and some of the things that I picked up on with the film were probably the more educational parts, because it's something that I didn't really know about until let me put it another way. I think what when I first saw this movie back in, I want to say 2012, when it was out on, DVD or whatever. So about 8 years ago when I first saw it, I didn't pay too much attention to the science, because I'm like, epidemiology is cool, but it kind of slows the pace a little bit. But now that I look back on it 8 years later, one, I really love the way that Steven Soderbergh directs movies, but two, it's actually really good when you compare it to the discussions that are happening right now. So the first thing that I wanted to mention was the discussion that I think is most prescient to our current times is the meeting where Kate Winslet's character, she's mostly one of the main characters, I'll say. She is in a meeting with a number of other epidemiologists at the CDC.
Need to consider closing the schools down.
And who stays home with the kids? People that work at stores, government workers, people that work at hospitals. When will we know what this is? What causes it? What cures it? Things that keep people calm.
What we need to determine is this. For every person who gets sick, how many other people are they likely to infect? So, for seasonal flu, that's usually about 1. Smallpox, on the other hand, it's over 3. Now, before we had a vaccine, polio spread at a rate between 4 and 6. Now, we call that number the R0. R stands for the reproductive rate of the virus.
Any ideas what that might be for this?
How fast it multiplies depends on a variety of factors. The incubation period, how long a person is contagious. Sometimes people can be contagious without even having symptoms. We need to know that too. And we need to know how big the population of people susceptible to the virus might be.
So far, that appears to be everyone with hands, a mouth, and a nose.
Once we know the R0, we'll be able to get a handle on the scale of the epidemic.
Do we shut down our entire society? And Kate Winslet's like, you know what? We've got to talk about the R0 value.
Right.
And it's a very crucial number, because it's the value that represents how many people we infect as vectors for diseases that are communicable, and specifically for diseases that are highly contagious through things like fomites, surfaces, and as well as aerosol particles, like from sneezes and coughs. And so they were trying to figure out what that R0 value is, to see how virulent it is, how many people are infected every time somebody comes into contact with an infected person. And it's a very timely discussion. It kind of just, when you watch it again, and I watched it a couple of nights ago again for the episode, I'm gonna go ahead and play that for you all. And so it's very sobering, right? It's like, oh my gosh.
Oh, extremely.
Because you don't think that we're gonna have to deal with a pandemic. That's so far-fetched, and yet here we are.
Well, the other thing about that particular scene is that was actually once she was on site at that first hotspot in Minnesota, which was where Gwyneth Paltrow's character resided.
Right.
And so that was actually before they were able to calculate an R0 value, but she was contextualizing it with other diseases. So she talked about the flu having an R0 of 1. I think smallpox and polio were the other two she used as comparisons with, I think, one of them was an R naught of 2, one of a 4. And as you watch the movie sort of play out, they initially believe that it has an R naught value of 2, which was bad enough.
Right.
But later on, they determine it has an R naught value of 4.
Yeah.
Which is why the numbers are so crazy after such a short period of time.
Yeah. And, when you get to, the only thing that's really saving us right now with respect to COVID is that its R naught value is closer to 2.
Right.
And so it's less communicable than polio or smallpox, which is very good, and which is why China and South Korea saw improvement after incorporating isolation, quarantine, social distancing, that sort of thing, and getting testing going. So that R naught value is crucial, and I think this conversation that they have about it, though, and the things that lead up to it, and the things that happen after it in that particular meeting room, is sort of the pivot point for the film. Because then after the information gets out, then you have the scenes where people are looting. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly play the clip of Matt Damon, who is Gwyneth Paltrow's character's husband. Matt Damon's character going to the grocery store with his daughter.
Is anyone even working here?
Just get the cereal. Jory, don't touch anything.
An old woman coughing, and she coughs like directly onto Matt Damon. Like, how friggin' rude, right? They're like walking out, and he's trying to get hand sanitizer on her, and this delivery guy gets beaten, pulled out of his truck and beaten so they could steal the contents of the truck. I think steal the entire truck is really what they were going for.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and so you feed into that panic. So, Anthony, now that you've read more about it and engaged in the movie a little bit more, if I were your student and I asked you, okay, Dr. Z, why are people buying toilet paper? Why is this film depicting this panic buying, this looting? What about it? What about a pandemic like this would cause people to do that?
Well, the answer that I always give my students, I should say, when they ask me about why toilet paper is, I have no idea, just like everybody else. It doesn't make rational sense. But when you're talking about something like what we're experiencing right now, rationality sometimes goes out the window. And so I don't claim to be any sort of expert on pandemic psychology or the psychology of the uncertainty, but there's a lot of things that we start to look at when it comes to that start to make sense. And if I actually thought about it, if somebody said, hey, by the way, there's going to be a pandemic, what do you think is going to happen?
Right.
It actually is a little bit predictable. First and foremost, when we don't know what's going on, we tend to resort to extremes.
Okay.
And those things tend to become even more amplified when we hear conflicting messages. And so we could look at either the conflicting messages that we get from the news or we get from like our leaders. But also too, there's a very conflicted message. Here we're being told there's a very deadly, virus that is easily communicable. Oh, but by the way, if you wash your hands, you'll be fine. So that doesn't register, right? I mean, you're talking about something that's rather complicated with a really simple solution. And so that lends to the conflicting messages. We also tend to, again, engage in these behaviors when there's a lack of clear direction.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about the importance, at least about that scene with Kate Winslet and talking about closing schools. And there was and the are not. But there was a lot of things going on there that are eerily mirror what we're seeing now. They talked about things like messaging to the public,
right,
and incubation periods and population that's most susceptible,
right,
contact tracing. These are all things that we're hearing about now. And in the early days of this, there was really a lack of clear direction. And then you get the idea that, monkey see, monkey do, right? Panic buying begets panic buying.
Sure, yeah.
So you walk into a grocery store and people have, 40 rolls of toilet paper. You're like, oh, damn, I better buy some toilet paper.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it allows people to have some kind of sense of control, even if it's not really terribly helpful, especially in a situation like this.
Sure. Okay. I can dig that. I can buy that. So, I think this bleeds into a point that you made in our notes doc, where the uncertainty, which you sort of alluded to, is going to make people act in various ways, in certain ways. So, do you want to expand on that? Some of the examples from the film regarding uncertainty.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Again, no expert here, but from, what I have tried to read to try and understand this a little bit better, what the psychology of uncertainty postulates is that people are notoriously unwilling to make sacrifices for others when the benefits are uncertain.
Sure.
And as a matter of fact, they're willing to make decisions that would hurt others. Okay. So when we look at things like panic buying, they don't think about the fact that, you're buying up all the baby wipes or the diapers and that, or hand sanitizer, and leaving perhaps members of the vulnerable population unable to buy it.
Yeah, just to quickly interrupt there, that guy in Tennessee who bought like $17,000 worth of sanitizer and wipes and all of that stuff, hoping to sell it for gigantic profits. So I think that fits, right? That gouging, the price gouging aspect of it too, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a huge thing.
I think the government told him that he had to give it to charity.
Yeah, I believe. I don't remember if they told him he had to or that they were going to prosecute him if he tried to sell it at a profit. But I think he ultimately decided to donate it because he was shamed into it.
Yeah.
So you definitely saw a lot of that in the film in terms of the decisions and behaviors of people. Whether it be the looting, the small town with the businesses on fire, the riots when the military are handing out MREs. You already talked about the people dragging the driver out of the van.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found the most interesting was the contrast between that and some of those extreme selfless behaviors in the film. And when you look at, and I, as you said earlier about Steven Soderbergh as a director, I'm a huge fan of his.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to, according to him, he wanted to show people at their worst, but also how their best comes out during these times.
Oh, yeah,
and to me,
great.
Yeah, to me, that was probably even more interesting than looking at these behaviors that were reprehensible. When you look at, the motivations behind, and I don't remember the actress's name, but the character is Dr. Hextall giving herself the vaccine because it worked on a monkey.
Uh-huh.
And then later learning that she was the daughter of a doctor, who basically ended up becoming infected because of his unwillingness to not treat, people who were sick. So there was this kind of like father, like daughter thing going on. We also saw the Marion Cotillard.
Cotillard, yeah.
Wrong. Leonora, her opting to stay behind once she learned that the World Health Organization had duped the small village and given them placebos instead of the actual vaccine. And she was willing to trade her own freedom because of a sort of moral belief that those people had been done wrong. And then at the end, the Lawrence Fishburne character giving his vaccine, despite the fact that he had this privileged place in line, to the son of that CDC employee whose, child was in need.
Yeah.
So I found those to be really interesting elements to this film and a really nice balance to the chaos that was going on around it.
Yes, I agree. Those little points there are important. And I want to specifically bring up the Dr. Cheever, which is Lawrence Fishburne's character, giving up his vaccine at the end. And it's a redemption bit, because earlier in the film he's seen as a bit mechanical. And maybe, what's the word? Dispassionate, with respect to people's lives, right? And so, you think that, oh, okay, he's going to be this automaton character that's sort of like just all brass and we got to get the job done kind of thing. What do we tell the public? That sort of thing. But then at the end, I think he sort of redeems his humanity a little bit by giving up his access to the vaccine for the son of the employee.
Right. Yeah, he was a very by the numbers kind of guy.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're referring to.
Right.
You started to see a little bit of that humanity, though, when the CDC employee and Kate Winslet's character, who's in Minnesota, eventually contracts the virus and dies. You definitely see some humanity there, and the guilt for not only sending her, but then not being able to get her out,
right,
and having her die in one of the most horrific sort of scenarios. I mean, if you think about the idea about dying alone, but not only did she die alone, she died alone in a makeshift hospital in a gym, and was buried in a makeshift mass grave.
Yep.
So you started to see a little bit of his humanity come out there. And I think definitely towards the end, when he gives up his place in line and gives that vaccine, it was sort of his redemption.
Yeah. And that's actually an interesting point, because one of the striking scenes, it's just maybe, I don't know if I want to call it a scene, but just a few lines. He's talking to Kate Winslet on the phone, and he is, they're going back and forth, and I think it's when she started getting sick, but she wasn't sure. She kind of had a feeling, but she wasn't sure. And he said, if you're up in the middle of the night and you can't go to sleep, you call me.
Right.
With a number of other different things too, as like a supervisor to an employee. But like the last thing was like, if you are awake in the middle of the night and you cannot go to sleep, you call me.
Yeah. Yeah. And he, there was also the part of that conversation where he was trying to, and I might be kind of combining two conversations here, but where he was talking and empathizing with her situation and being like, there was a time where I was like you and I was out doing, what you're doing right now. So I understand. And then Kate Winslet comes back with well, have you ever had to tell a husband that his wife was cheating on him? Which is, again, from the start of the movie. And he's like, oh, no, I've never had to do that.
Yeah.
And you can kind of really see, and I really liked her character. She really brought something to that in terms of the on the ground, what we see in the early days of an epidemic. And I thought she, especially in that scene we talked about earlier, kind of really shined a light on a lot of the things that we're seeing right now with COVID-19.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I want to pivot to an additional psychological idea that really stuck with me. And I think it's a broader topic, and I think we could spend an entire episode talking about this. But it's so along the same lines of why people are buying TP because they see other people buying TP. It is, why do people believe the conspiracy theories? A subset of people. I won't say most people are gullible. I think most people can see conspiracy theories for what they are. On their face. Like, you don't actually have to watch a documentary on why something's a conspiracy theory to know that it's conspiracy theory. Because most people can just be like, yeah, no, that seems conspiracy theory-ish to me. But there is a character played by Jude Law in the movie.
How swarmy was he?
Oh gosh, he's so bad. He's so bad. It's like British Alex Jones, like 5 years before Alex Jones got really quote unquote famous. And the movie came out before Sandy Hook, which basically shot Alex Jones off into the stratosphere of infamy. But yeah,
well, you could argue that this was, Jude Law's character's Sandy Hook moment. He was thrust into the national spotlight based on his early talking about some videos that were surfacing about this issue, and had generated quite a loyal following of people who bought what he was selling.
Mm-hmm. And he peddled in those unsubstantiated claims on social media. Like, he just used social media much like conspiracy theorists now use social media. They just or bots, Russian bots, take your pick, where they just sort of plaster some claim on there and let people sort of fester with it, and then you repeat it, and then you repeat it, and then you repeat it, and you keep repeating it, where then the person who keeps seeing it is going to be like, oh man, that makes a lot of sense. I keep seeing that. If I keep seeing that, it must be true.
Right.
It must be true.
All sorts of issues of problem solving and cognition and confirmation bias.
Yep.
And why it is people choose to buy into these. You're absolutely right. And it was Forsythia, right? That was the homeopathic. Medicine?
Yes. Forsythia.
Yeah.
And then so Jude Law's character appears on a great little segment with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is an actual doctor on CNN. It's not CNN in the movie, but it's a cable news channel, much like that.
It might as well be.
And so he has Dr. Chiva on, the CDC guy, Lawrence Fishburne's character, and Jude Law's conspiracy theorist, and they're having a back and forth about Forsythia, and Dr. Cheever calls it out as a literally calls it out as homeopathic.
Yes.
There are stories circulating on the internet that in India and elsewhere, the drug ribavirin has been shown to be effective against this virus. Yet, Homeland Security is telling the CDC not to make any announcements until stockpiles of the drug can be secured.
Well, Dr. Gupta, there continue to be evaluations of several drugs. Ribavirin is among them. But right now, our best defense has been social distancing. No handshaking, staying home when you're sick, washing your hands frequently.
Can you tell us to date how many people have died from this virus?
Very difficult. We're still working on confirming that number. There are 50 different states in this country, which means there are 50 different health departments, followed by 50 different protocols.
Let me bring in Alan Crumwoody into this debate as well. Alan's a freelance journalist. He was the first to track the Shinko Busman video. Alan, today on Twitter, you wrote that the truth about this virus is being kept from the world by the CDC, by the World Health Organization, to allow friends of the current administration to benefit from it, both financially and physically.
There are therapies we know are effective right now, like forsythia, and they don't even appear on the CDC website.
On your blog, you also wrote that the World Health Organization is somehow in bed with pharmaceutical companies.
Because they are. That's who stands to gain from this. They're working hand in glove. And the hand is reaching into our pockets.
The CDC is exploring forsythia and other homeopathic treatments, but right now, there's no science to back any of these claims.
Or no way Dr. Cheever or the people who put him into power can profit from it.
We're not ruling anything out. There are people who are sick, people who are dying, and we
They're not keeping us safe from this any more than they kept us safe
about the
from Wall
health of every
Street
American
or Katrina. Dr. Cheever is being a bit disingenuous when he says every American citizen.
We're working very hard to find out where this virus came from, to treat it, and to vaccinate against it if we can. We don't know all of that yet. We just don't know. What we do know is that in order to become sick, you have to first come in contact with a sick person or something that they touched. In order to get scared, all you have to do is come in contact with a rumor or the television or the internet. I think what Mr. Crumwoody is spreading is far more dangerous than the disease.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yes.
That's funny.
What's funny?
No, I think you're funny, because if you check on Facebook, you'll find a communique attributed to Dr. Cheever by Elizabeth Nygaard about the quarantine of Chicago, hours before it was announced to the public. That's why I think he's a bit disingenuous when he says equal care for all and not just his friends.
Some pretty wild allegations here, Dr. Cheever. I mean, can you tell us what communication appeared and when? What exactly is the nature of your relationship with Elizabeth Nygaard?
Well, again, I'm not aware of anything attributed to me on any social network.
I'm sure you're not.
Facebook,
It is
Twitter.
there. It is there. Tell them what an Arnold of 2 really means, Dr. Cheever. Teach them some math. No? I'll do it. On day 1, there were 2 people with it, and then there were 4, and then it was 16, and you think you've got it in front of you. But next it's 256, and then it's 65,000, and it's behind you and above you and all around you. In 30 steps, it's 1 billion sick. 3 months. It's a math problem you can do on a napkin, and that's where we're headed. And that's why you won't even tell us the number of the dead, will you, Dr. Cheever? But you'll tell your friends when to get out of Chicago before anyone else has a chance.
Honestly, life paralleling art right now, but with the whole thing with the malaria drug and COVID-19 and the variations of chloroquine or queen, something like that. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
And the variants of that, and the couple in Arizona who ended up taking them, and then
it wasn't the malaria drug, it was a fish food
yes, it was the
product
fish
or
tank cleaner, right? The other one
Yeah.
is the malaria drug. You're right. Yeah. So it was the variant of chloroquine or chloroquine that is used to clean fish tanks, not the one that is used as a medicine.
Right.
So, which has a very narrow FDA approval, by the way, but there is no evidence that homeopathic medication, if we can even call it medication, homeopathic treatments would work for something that has a 20% mortality rate, let alone something that has a 1% mortality rate. Because there's no evidence that homeopathic treatments work at all.
Right. And in that scene, Dr. Cheever talks about that as being one of the medications being tested, which then the Jude Law character immediately turns, around and being like, oh, how can we trust anything that you find out? Which is, that's excellent fodder for conspiracy theorists, right?
Yes, that was the second part of what I wanted to bring up, is that, once the claims are revealed to be extraordinary and outlandish, well, the pivot is, well, you just work for the Illuminati.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, that you're in bed, or the government's in bed with large pharma.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the outcome, it really preys on this situation where no matter what the outcome is, they win, right? Because if they find that it works, well, great, right? This is the wonder drug, and now I am a genius. But if not, it also confirms the conspiracy theory, because of course it's not, because the government's in bed with big pharma.
Right.
And it's a no-lose situation for them.
Right.
So, yeah, those conspiracy theories are very insidious.
Yeah, and they can be pernicious to you. Because the other day, it was either yesterday or the day before, I saw something going around social media where in order to find relief from your debtors, you had to say something regarding, I lost my job because of coronavirus. You had to say that specific phrase or something like that. And I feel like it's just an attempt to make people feel stupid and silly, because I doubt you actually have to say that to your debtors, like that literal phrase. Otherwise, they can't do anything about it.
Right. I think I read something similar, right? They were told not to ask specific questions if it was related to that, and it was only if it was initiated by the customer could they offer any kind of relief, which you're right, sounds silly.
Yeah, and it sounds silly, but it also seems like it's designed to make the person sound silly who's like engaging in this behavior, right?
Yep. Nope, absolutely.
And so it's not necessarily dangerous, because I doubt you actually have to do that with your debtors, but the idea is that these tiny little things work together to make people a bit uneasy, which brings up the fear component, and it makes people start questioning the information that they're getting. And so then, people have to come out and say, there is accurate and useful information out there. Please do still use the CDC's website. The CDC is the best place for this information. Your local health departments, like, not everybody can coordinate this level of propaganda and tomfoolery. You're going to eventually break through all of the levels of bureaucracy and get some semblance of the truth.
The one thing we didn't talk about that particular scene, which I think you sort of have to if you're going to talk about conspiracy theories, is towards the end of that particular segment, the Jude Law character basically confronts the audience or alerts the audience about Dr. Cheever had tipped off his wife about the plan to close Chicago.
Right.
And it was done in sort of nobody knows about this until everybody knows it.
Yep.
And he called his wife and told her to get out. And so the Jude Law character exposes that on that particular TV show, which immediately discredits anything else that he says, because look at what he's done, despite the fact that the behavior that Dr. Cheever engaged in was something that every single person would do.
Yeah. Especially to their spouse, significant other. I don't think you can fault somebody for reaching out to their spouse and letting them know, hey, this is going to happen.
Yeah. And it's that, but that is enough to discredit him. And then by virtue of everything else that he said, well, we can't trust the CDC. Who can we trust? Oh, well, we could trust Jude Law and Forsythia and whatever he's peddling.
Right. Yeah. The just drink your silver from Jim Baker.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah, that'll work.
The New York Attorney General told him to stop, or they were going to prosecute him.
Thankfully. Yeah.
there's just too much there's too much taking advantage of people
preying on people's fear
in desperate times.
Oh, yeah. Again, going back to this idea that when you don't know what is going on and you're uncertain, you're really looking for control and you're looking for answers.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily apply the same rigid problem solving standards that you would ordinarily. Look at that scene in the film. And again, what I love about this film is everything's like kind of time stamped. So you're talking roughly 2 weeks into the epidemic where there's a riot at the pharmacy when they learn that there's only 50 dosage of the forsythia available, and people lose their mind. Throwing glass through throwing a chair through the glass and bum rushing the pharmacist, and you start to see this breakdown of societal norms because they're looking for anything, anything that could help them gain a better understanding of what's going on or gain some control over a situation that they have no control over.
Yeah. Control is, it's missing from pandemics.
Right.
It really is, because we're at the whim of a tiny little organism that's only job and only goal in life is to replicate. And it found the greatest place to replicate, according to itself, in the lung tissue of human beings as well as other mammals. And it's like, oh, screw bats. I can get my kicks by doing this in humans. And that's it. We are at the whim of something that all it cares about is to do that.
And then the only way we have to explain it is through like complex epidemiological models and math.
Right. And that offers some semblance of control because at least we can do a little bit of prediction here and there in order to mitigate some of those effects. But at the end of the day, it's an organism that's going to do what it's going to do. Yeah. And we have some saving grace from its low R naught value, from its really weak exterior. So it is its RNA is surrounded by fatty tissue, which breaks down in contact with soap, which is pretty cool.
That's nice.
And so you can expose the RNA, and then it's game over for those particular particles, those virions, which is a cool word. Most people don't.
It is.
Most people don't talk about little virus particles as virions, but that's what they are. And then 60% alcohol solutions will take care of it too, but 60% or higher. And so we have these little mitigation things, but is it really control? It's debatable, I think.
Right.
It leads to the fear and the uncertainty, all the things that we've definitely approached in this episode.
The tagline for Contagion, which I never knew, is, and I'm looking for it. Here we go. Nothing spreads like fear.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
The film is perfect for that.
It's a really good one. It is a really good one. What I wanted to do is end this episode with a brief chat on what you and I could share with the listeners for how to deal with this in our time. So do you have any tips or offerings maybe that you've given to your students or from your experience on how to deal with the current situation?
This is a really interesting question, and because I've been very honest with my students and telling them that I'm fumbling my way through this just as much as they are,
which is valid and fine.
And they seem to really appreciate that because on the surface, through the content that I'm delivering in my classes, it seems like I have everything together. but that's really as a result of lots of hours of getting it wrong and trying to put out a product or class that makes some sense. And so I've been trying to remind them that we're all struggling in our own ways and that it's really important for them to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Which isn't easy for them to do because they've been thrust into this role of online student, a role that they didn't sign up for. They've been told to go home. So, their spring break was ruined. And then they thought they were coming back to campus and they're not. They're now working or caring for family or just otherwise stressed out. So that's what I've been trying to tell them because I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't know that I have good coping skills. So
how are you coping then?
Oh, not well. Trying to make sure that I take advantage of what I can do as opposed to thinking about what I can't.
Right. That's a good mindset.
I have a little spot here in town. It's not the most picturesque. It certainly isn't where you would go if you wanted to sit by the water. It's not the nicest park, but it's perfect because nobody goes there. So I try and get there for a little while every day.
Yeah.
And again, I live on the Gulf Coast. It's, except for hurricanes, it's an ideal place to be living. And so trying to take advantage and looking at, okay, there's a lot that I can't do, but what can I do? And trying to focus on that.
Okay.
I guess
that's a good message.
Yeah, I think it's some sort of non-technical mindfulness or something of that nature.
Yeah, I like that. Some of the things that I've been doing are, generally speaking, what I tend to do anyways. Watch a lot of movies, watch a lot of TV. Now I do it a little bit more because there's no going places. I don't have travel time to work anymore.
Yeah, it's nice.
At least for the foreseeable future, today I have a little bit of a different weather situation than you, being in central Illinois. Today was amazing. It was actually low 60s in the afternoon and a cloudless day.
Beautiful.
And it hasn't been that way very often in the last few weeks, especially the year that was March 2020. Because I feel like the beginning of March was a year or two ago.
It feels like it.
And so there's been a lot of dreary days, but getting outside, going for walks, taking the dog for a walk, and sort of switching off school when I can and just being like, you know what, I can't do work right now. I'm not going to do work right now. I've done the best that I can for this moment. And for the next couple of days, and we'll tackle the rest later. And I read a very good piece about the feelings that people are having right now, and the people and the things that the kinds of responses that you see in the film from people, of course, but besides fear, is that a lot of people are experiencing grief.
Yeah. Mourning the life that they used to have.
Yes, mourning the life that they used to have, and how lots of times we kind of take it for granted. And I think it's valid to have those feelings. You continue to have those feelings, and nobody should tell you to pick yourself up by the bootstraps, because where are you going to go? Are you going to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and go to your living room? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's important to acknowledge those feelings. And I give myself a little bit of time every day to feel sorry, feel a little pity.
Yeah.
To think about how crappy everything is. But I try to kind of restrict that and then kind of get it out of my system and be like, okay, what am I going to do? What do I need to get done today?
Sure.
What can I do that I wouldn't ordinarily get done? Like you said, I've been watching a lot more movies. catching up on Netflix binging. Not exactly the most productive stuff, but definitely enjoyable.
Yeah. The old adage that you have to think about what you can control, and I'm probably just destroying this, but you do what you can control, and you let go of the things that you can't, and some good old. It sounds like, Anthony, you have some good old fashioned problem focused coping going on right now with all of the stressors.
Yeah. I am trying.
All right, Anthony, was there anything else about Contagion that you wanted to share with the listeners?
The only really thing I would ask or inquire with people is, why are people watching this now? I think it's worth exploring. I mean, we know we're out of time, but it seems kind of interesting that a movie that depicts a situation so much worse than what we're going through is becoming so popular. And I think that's something that's, worth exploring, worth thinking about. And I think that's in general for movies, kind of thinking about, well, what is it about this particular movie that I'm watching at this time? What purpose is it serving? And so I kind of thought that it would be kind of interesting for your listeners to think about, if they decide as a result of listening to your podcast or just in general popping that film in, well, what purpose is it serving, and how are they using it? I think that's kind of an interesting element of film that we don't often take time to consider.
Yeah, because it's not very often that life imitates art. And so when it does, it's jarring.
Yeah, and not normally this close.
Not normally this close. Oh boy! All right. Yeah, that's a good food for thought. That's a good food for thought. Last nugget there. So that's good. I want to thank Anthony Zoccolillo for joining me to discuss Contagion, a very timely topic, very timely film. While saying goodbye, Anthony, is there anything that you'd like to plug? If folks can find out more about your work, anything else, don't forget to say goodbye.
Well, I mean, I live a pretty simple life, so I don't know that I have anything about my work. But I would like to give a plug to another podcast.
Sure.
That I think your listeners would find enjoyable. I've been lucky enough to work with these guys on an episode, and their podcast follows a very similar format as your last episode, where they pair a couple movies together.
Yeah, so that was the Rashomon Knives Out episode.
Sure, yeah, and they usually take current films, so something that's usually in the theaters right now, and then pair it with a older comparison film.
Okay.
And the spin that they bring to it is that they also pair both films with craft beer. So it's an interesting kind of spin. And so not specifically deep diving into any sort of psychological content. Their comment is incredibly astute, and they are fans, and I think fans of film and beer will enjoy their production. So the podcast is called Beer in a Movie. Not terribly surprising. And you can find out more about them and listen at beerandamoviepodcast.com.
Yeah, and that's AND in the URL there. Well, yes, Anthony, thanks again for stopping by.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet. Listener, please keep sharing. Please keep subscribing and liking and commenting and giving feedback. The last episode, I gave you a challenge. Share the podcast with 5 of your friends or colleagues. I know you can do it. I know you can do it. So whether you listen to all the episodes or listen to only the films that you see in the title that you know, others might love this podcast, and they might want to do the same. So please let them know. That'll be amazing if you did. The show is fairly unique, so letting others know is how we grow. I just rhymed. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. We appreciate the support. And until the next episode, thanks for listening.